The champagne toast was about to begin when I stood from my seat in the corner of the tent. Every head turned toward me, confusion rippling through the crowd of 300 guests who'd spent the last hour celebrating my son Michael's marriage to Vanessa Blackwood. If I could have everyone's attention, I said quietly, my voice somehow carrying across the reception despite the tremor I felt inside. Michael's face went pale. Vanessa's mother, Patricia Blackwood, stood abruptly from the head table, the table where I should have been sitting. Where any mother of the groom should have been sitting. Eleanor, this isn't the time, Michael started. I opened the manila envelope I'd been holding throughout the ceremony. Throughout the reception where I'd been seated in the fourth row, behind Vanessa's cousins, behind her father's business associates, behind people my son had never even mentioned. I think it is the time, I said calmly. I handed the first document to the wedding coordinator, a young woman who'd spent the past month taking orders exclusively from Patricia Blackwood. Could you please distribute these? The coordinator's hands shook as she took the papers. Her eyes widened as she read the letterhead, Thornfield Estate Management. Vanessa clutched Michael's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his tuxedo sleeve. What is this? She hissed. Patricia Blackwood snatched a document from the coordinator's hands. The color drained from her face as she read. Her husband, Richard Blackwood, who'd spent the cocktail hour loudly discussing his historic family estate where the wedding was being held, leaned over her shoulder. This can't be right, Patricia whispered, but her voice cracked. I met my son's eyes across the reception tent. 29 years of his life, and he didn't know. He'd never asked. He'd been too busy being ashamed of his simple mother who'd worked as a bookkeeper, who drove a 12-year-old sedan, who lived in a modest townhouse. Read it, I said simply. Michael took the paper with trembling hands. His eyes scanned the document once, twice, then lifted to meet mine with an expression I'd never seen before. Complete and utter shock. The wedding guests whispered among themselves as copies made their way through the crowd. Someone gasped. Someone else laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. Mom, Michael breathed, the single word carrying across the sudden silence. But I was already walking toward the exit of the tent, my simple blue dress rustling against my legs. They had no idea what was coming. None of them did. Because the property deed was just the beginning. 29 years earlier, I'd held my newborn son in a hospital room while his father, James, paced nervously by the window. We were young, I was 24, James was 26, and terrified. But we were together, and we were determined. James worked at his father's small manufacturing company, learning the business from the ground up despite his engineering degree from a state school. I'd kept the books for my family's estate management company, a quiet job that let me work from home once Michael arrived. We lived simply, intentionally. While James's college friends bought houses in expensive neighborhoods and luxury cars, we saved. We invested. When James's father died suddenly 2 years later, James took over the struggling company with nothing but determination and a vision for expansion. Those were lean years. I remember nights when James worked until 2 a.m., then woke at 6 a.m. to start again. I managed the books for both his company and what remained of my family's estate business, a single historic property my grandfather had purchased in the 1940s, which had been generating modest rental income for decades. Michael grew up watching his father build something from nothing. Watching me stretch every dollar. We lived in a small house in a good school district. We drove practical cars. We took modest vacations. Why don't we live like the other kids' families? Michael asked once, when he was 10. Because we're building something that will last, James had told him, ruffling his hair. Your mom and I are playing the long game, son. Michael seemed to understand then. He excelled in school, earned scholarships, made us proud. When James died suddenly of a heart attack when Michael was 19, stress, the doctors said, years of working 70-hour weeks, I held our family together. I kept managing both businesses, kept the books, kept everything running while Michael finished college. I helped him transition into his father's company when he graduated, teaching him everything James had taught me about the business his father had built into a mid-sized success. You're going to do amazing things, I told Michael the day he officially took over as CEO of Thornton Manufacturing at 25. Your father would be so proud. He'd hugged me then. I couldn't have done this without you, Mom. I'd believed him. I'd believed that despite living modestly, despite driving my old car and shopping at discount stores, despite never flaunting the quiet wealth that had accumulated over decades of careful investing and estate management, my son understood what mattered. I'd believed he valued substance over appearance. I'd been wrong. The change started about 18 months before the wedding, when Michael met Vanessa Blackwood at a charity gala I'd encouraged him to attend for networking. Vanessa was beautiful, sophisticated, and came from what she called old money, though I'd quietly researched the Blackwood family and discovered their wealth was actually quite new, barely 2 generations old, built on Richard Blackwood's success in commercial real estate. But they lived like aristocracy. Mansion in the historic district. Country club memberships. Luxury cars. The kind of conspicuous wealth that announced itself loudly. Michael started changing. Designer suits replaced his father's practical approach to business attire. He traded his reliable Honda for a Tesla. He moved from his modest condo to a penthouse downtown. "You're spending a lot," I mentioned gently during one of our weekly dinners that were becoming less frequent. "I'm successful, Mom. I can afford it." His tone had an edge I'd never heard before. "The company's doing well." The company was doing well. Because I'd spent 29 years managing it with James, then helping Michael establish himself. Because the investments I'd made, the connections I'd maintained, the careful stewardship of resources I'd practiced, all of it had created the foundation for his success. But he'd started seeing me differently. Through Vanessa's eyes, I suspected. The first real wound came 6 months before the wedding, at a company dinner where I'd been invited to sit on the board of advisors, a courtesy position I'd held since James died. Vanessa attended as Michael's fiancée. Her mother, Patricia, came as well, somehow inserted into what was supposed to be a business dinner. "Eleanor, you're looking well," Patricia said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Though that dress is certainly practical." It was the same dress I'd worn to board meetings for 5 years. Classic, professional, appropriate. "Thank you," I replied evenly. Throughout dinner, Patricia dominated the conversation, discussing her family's estate. I knew it was a large house they'd purchased 10 years ago, their social connections, their charitable foundations. When I mentioned my work managing the estate properties, Patricia's laugh was like ice. "Oh, you're in property management? How quaint. Like a landlord." "Something like that," I'd said quietly. Michael hadn't defended me. He'd looked embarrassed. That was when I knew I'd lost my son to the mirage of old money and social status. The wedding planning was worse. Vanessa and Patricia took over completely, treating me like an inconvenient obligation. "We've selected the venue," Patricia announced at the one planning meeting I was invited to, 3 months before the wedding. "The Thornfield estate. It's been in our family for generations." My blood ran cold. Thornfield estate. My family's estate. The property my grandfather had purchased in 1947, which I'd managed quietly for decades, which generated substantial income I'd never discussed with Michael. "The Blackwood family estate," Vanessa corrected, squeezing Michael's hand. "We're so fortunate to have access to such a historic property." They didn't know. The Blackwoods had rented Thornfield for exclusive events dozens of times over the years, always through my estate management company, always through intermediaries. They genuinely believed they had some kind of special connection to it. And Michael? Michael looked at me apologetically but said nothing. "It's a beautiful property," I managed. The final humiliation came 2 weeks before the wedding, when Vanessa's wedding coordinator called me. "Mrs. Thornton, we need to discuss your seating arrangement." I assumed I'd be at the head table, I said carefully. As mother of the groom. An awkward pause. Mrs. Blackwood felt it would be more appropriate to have only the immediate wedding party at the head table. "You'll be in the 4th row, which is still quite prominent." 4th row. Behind Vanessa's extended family. Behind business associates. Behind people who'd never met my son. "I see. It's really just about space constraints and photography angles," the coordinator rushed to explain, but I could hear the discomfort in her voice. She was following orders she didn't agree with. I could have said something. Should have said something. Instead, I responded, "That's fine." I heard her relief. "Oh, wonderful. Mrs. Blackwood will be so pleased." I hung up and sat in my quiet townhouse, looking at the photo of James on the mantel. Our wedding photo, taken at a small ceremony with 50 guests. Simple. Real. Filled with people who loved us. "I think it's time," I told his picture. "Time to stop being invisible. Time to stop playing small. Time to remind my son who his mother really was." The next morning, I called my attorney, Martin Chen, who'd handled my family's estate business for 15 years. "Martin, I need you to prepare some documents for me." I could hear the curiosity in his voice. "What kind of documents, Eleanor?" "Property deeds for Thornfield Estate. Corporate shareholding documents for Thornton Manufacturing. And a few other items I'll list for you." A pause. "This is about Michael's wedding, isn't it?" Martin knew everything. He'd been the one who'd helped me structure my investments, who'd managed the trust funds, who'd kept my financial life private at my request. "Yes. Are you sure about this?" "Once you reveal." "I'm sure. They've made their choices. I need to make mine." Over the next 2 weeks, I prepared quietly. I didn't confront Michael. I didn't argue with the Blackwoods. I confirmed my fourth-row seat with Grace. But I also confirmed something else, my attendance at the wedding as more than just mother of the groom. I reviewed my assets with Martin. The picture was clear. Thornfield Estate, owned entirely by me through my family trust, worth approximately $8 million. The Blackwoods had been paying rental fees for years without realizing who actually owned it. Thornton Manufacturing, I held 51% of shares. James had structured it that way before he died, knowing that Michael was young and would need guidance. I'd never exercised my majority control, had let Michael run the company as he saw fit. But legally, I could outvote him on any major decision. Various investment properties and portfolios, worth approximately $12 million, carefully accumulated over 3 decades of modest living and smart investing. Total net worth, somewhere around $24 million. My son, who was ashamed of my 12-year-old sedan, didn't know any of this. The Blackwoods, who treated me like a poor relation, definitely didn't know. "What do you want to do with this information?" Martin asked. "I want to attend my son's wedding," I said. "And I want to give them a gift they'll never forget." I also called Catherine Morrison, an old friend who ran a luxury boutique downtown. "Kathy, I need a dress. Something simple but elegant. Something that says I belong here." She'd known me for 20 years, had always wondered why I dressed so modestly despite the checks I wrote for her charitable causes. "Eleanor, it's about time. Come in tomorrow." The dress she selected was perfect. Silk, dark blue, understated but clearly expensive. Paired with my grandmother's pearl earrings, the only visible wealth I ever wore. "You look like royalty," Kathy said softly. "I just look like myself," I corrected. "Maybe for the first time in a long time." The morning of the wedding, I drove to Thornfield Estate in my old sedan. I parked in the guest lot, watching expensive cars arrive. Watching the Blackwoods greet guests as if they owned the place. I'd given the estate management company instructions, treat me like any other guest. No special acknowledgement. Not yet. During the ceremony, I sat in my fourth-row seat and watched my son marry a woman who'd never asked about his mother. Never wondered why I lived modestly. Never questioned why I never needed their money or their status. I watched Michael look at Vanessa with love, and I felt my heart break a little. Because I did love my son. I wanted him to be happy. But I also wanted him to understand that happiness built on disrespecting those who'd sacrificed for you was a hollow thing. When they exchanged vows, I cried. But not for the reasons the people around me assumed. I cried because I was about to teach my son a lesson his father would have wanted him to learn much sooner. The reception was in full swing when I stood, envelope in hand. I'd waited through the cocktail hour, through the dinner service, through the Blackwoods' self-congratulatory toasts about bringing our families together and welcoming Michael into our distinguished lineage. Patricia had actually said, with a condescending smile toward my table, "And of course, We're delighted to include Eleanor as well. Every family has diverse backgrounds. The implication was clear. I was the poor relation being graciously included in their superior world. That was when I decided the time had come. If I could have everyone's attention, I said, standing. The wedding coordinator approached me nervously. Mrs. Thornton, is everything all right? Is there something you need? I handed her the first set of documents. I need you to distribute these, please. Her hands trembled as she read the letterhead, Thornfield Estate Management, LLC. And below it, in smaller print, Eleanor Thornton, owner and principal. I watched her eyes widen. Watched her look from the document to me, then to the Blackwoods, then back to me. Oh my God, she whispered. The documents made their way through the crowd. I'd had Martin prepare 300 copies, one for each guest. I wanted everyone to see this. Michael stood from the head table, his face confused. Mom, what are you doing? Reading the property deed for Thornfield Estate, I said calmly. The estate where you're currently having your wedding reception. The estate the Blackwoods described as their family property. Patricia Blackwood grabbed a copy from a nearby guest, her face going from confused to shocked to pale in a matter of seconds. This must be a mistake, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's not a mistake, I replied. My grandfather, William Morrison, purchased this estate in 1947. My mother inherited it. I inherited it. I've managed it through Morrison Estate Management, now Thornfield Estate Management, for the past 30 years. Every event the Blackwood family has hosted here, they've paid rental fees. To me, the silence was absolute. Richard Blackwood stood, his face reddening. That's impossible. We've been told this property has been in the same family for generations. It has been, I interrupted gently. My family. The Morrisons. I simply never advertised the connection. I handed the coordinator a second set of documents. And while we're making revelations, perhaps everyone should see the corporate structure of Thornton Manufacturing. These documents showed my 51% shareholding, detailed exactly when I'd acquired those shares, from my late husband, upon his death, and outlined my legal control of the company Michael had been running for the past 4 years. Michael's hands shook as he read. His face went from pale to red to pale again. You own the company? I hold majority shares, I corrected. Your father set it up that way to protect the business and protect you. He trusted me to guide you, to let you grow, to intervene only if necessary. I paused. I've never exercised my voting rights. I've let you run the company as you saw fit. But yes, Michael. Legally, I own controlling interest in Thornton Manufacturing. Vanessa looked like she'd been slapped. Her mother seemed unable to form words. I pulled out one more document. And finally, since we're discussing family assets, here's a summary of the Morrison-Thornton family trust holdings. Investment properties. Stock portfolios. Various business interests. All told, approximately $24 million in assets. The number hung in the air like a bomb. 24 million, someone in the crowd whispered. And she drives that old Honda. She lives in that small townhouse on Maple Street. I could hear the disbelief. The same disbelief I saw on my son's face. Mom, he said again, seeming unable to form any other words. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the boy I'd raised warring with the man he'd become. The son who'd worked beside me, who'd understood the value of substance over flash, who'd once told me that his father's most important lesson was character over appearance. When had he forgotten that? Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked. Would it have mattered? I replied. Would you have treated me differently if you'd known? Would Vanessa? Would her parents? The question hung there, unanswered. Because we all knew the truth. If they'd known about my wealth, everything would have been different. I would have been seated at the head table. Patricia Blackwood would have been ingratiating instead of condescending. Vanessa would have been solicitous instead of dismissive. But none of that would have been real. I wanted to know, I said quietly, my voice still carrying across the silent reception, whether my son valued me for who I am, not for what I have. The silence shattered like glass. Patricia Blackwood's voice rose first, shrill with desperation. "This is absurd. You're trying to ruin my daughter's wedding day." She turned to the crowd, hands gesturing wildly. "This woman is clearly mentally unstable. These documents are probably forgeries." "They're not forgeries, Mrs. Blackwood." Martin Chen stepped forward from where he'd been seated near the back. "I'd invited him, of course. I'm Eleanor Thornton's attorney, and I personally prepared these documents. They've been notarized and verified. If you'd like to dispute them, I'm happy to provide additional documentation." Richard Blackwood's face had gone from red to purple. "The venue rental fees, you've been taking our money under false pretenses." "Actually," Martin said calmly, "you've been paying fair market rate for an exclusive historic venue. The same rate we charge everyone. Eleanor never misrepresented anything. Your event coordinator worked with Thornfield Estate Management. All contracts were honored. You simply never asked who owned the company." Patricia grabbed her daughter's arm. "Vanessa, we're leaving. This is a circus. We don't have to tolerate this humiliation." "No." Vanessa's voice was quiet but firm. She was staring at Michael, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw something other than calculated poise in her expression. I saw genuine confusion. "Michael, did you know about any of this?" My son shook his head, still holding the documents. "No. I had no idea." "About your own company?" Vanessa's voice rose. "You didn't know your mother owned your company?" "I knew she was on the board," Michael said defensively. "I knew Dad left her shares. I thought it was a minority stake. Something symbolic." "51% is not symbolic, son," I said quietly. Around us, the wedding guests were talking openly now, no longer bothering to whisper. I heard fragments. "Can't believe she's been living like that with that kind of money. The Blackwoods must be mortified. What kind of son doesn't know his mother owns? She's been paying to rent her own family estate." A young woman I didn't recognize, one of Vanessa's bridesmaids, approached me hesitantly. "Mrs. Thornton, I just want to say, that was the most dignified power move I've ever witnessed." Several people laughed, nervous, uncertain laughter that broke the tension slightly. But Michael wasn't laughing. He'd sat down heavily in his chair at the head table, the documents spread in front of him. Vanessa stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, both of them looking shell-shocked. "Why?" Michael asked again, looking up at me with eyes that reminded me so much of his father. "Why did you hide this from me?" I walked toward the head table slowly, aware that every eye in the tent was on me. When I reached Michael, I pulled out the chair that should have been mine from the beginning and sat down beside my son. "Do you remember what your father used to say about wealth?" Michael's voice was barely a whisper. "That it reveals character. It doesn't build it." "I wanted to build your character," I said. "Your father and I made a choice when you were born. We could live ostentatiously, showering you with material things, teaching you that money equals worth. Or we could live modestly, save and invest wisely, and teach you that a person's value comes from who they are, not what they have." I gestured around the reception tent. "This wedding cost $300,000. Do you know what I spent on my wedding to your father?" Michael shook his head. $5,000. We had 50 guests. We got married in a small church. We had a reception in your grandfather's backyard. And it was one of the happiest days of my life." I paused. Not because it was cheap, but because every person there loved us for who we were. Tears were streaming down Michael's face now. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." "I know you are," I said gently. "But sorry isn't enough. You need to understand what you did." I turned to address the crowd. My voice was steady, calm, but clear. "For the past 18 months, I've been treated like an embarrassment by my own son. I've been excluded from wedding planning. I've been relegated to the 4th row at this ceremony. I've been described as diverse background, as if my modest lifestyle was something to be tolerated rather than respected." I looked at Patricia Blackwood. "I've been condescended to by people who thought that because I drove an old car and lived in a small house, I was somehow beneath them. People who measured worth by appearance rather than substance." Patricia had the grace to look ashamed. I could have revealed all of this months ago, I continued. I could have put a stop to the wedding entirely. I own this venue. I could have refused to rent it. I own controlling interest in the company that's currently paying for Michael's lifestyle. I could have exercised my voting rights. The crowd was utterly silent now. But I didn't. Because I wanted to see who my son had become. I wanted to know if the values his father and I taught him were still there, buried under the designer suits and the penthouse and the need to impress people. I looked at Michael. And I wanted to give you a chance to see what real wealth looks like. It's not this. I gestured to the elaborate decorations, the $1,000 flower arrangements, the ice sculpture. It's integrity. It's respecting the people who sacrificed for you. It's understanding that the woman who worked 3 jobs to pay for your college, who managed your father's company so you'd have an inheritance, who loved you unconditionally, that woman deserves better than the 4th row. The reception ended early. Many guests left quietly, the festive atmosphere irreparably broken. But some stayed, including, surprisingly, Vanessa's younger sister, who approached me as I prepared to leave. "Mrs. Thornton," she said quietly. "I'm sorry. We should have treated you better. All of us." I touched her hand gently. "Thank you, dear. That means more than you know." The real reckoning came 3 days later, when Michael appeared at my townhouse. He looked like he hadn't slept. Vanessa was with him, also looking exhausted. "Can we talk?" Michael asked. I let them in, made tea, and sat in my modest living room, the same living room where I'd raised my son, where we'd done homework together, where we'd grieved his father together. "I've spent the last 3 days going through everything," Michael said. "All the company records. All the documents. Mom, I had no idea how much you'd sacrificed. How much you'd built. How much you'd protected me. That was the point," I said gently. "But I should have known. I should have asked. I should have." He broke down, covering his face with his hands. "I was so ashamed of you. And you had no reason to be ashamed." "I did." Vanessa spoke for the first time. "Mrs. Thornton, I need to apologize too. My mother raised me to value appearances. Old money, social status, the right connections. She taught me that those things mattered most." She paused. "You taught me something different at that wedding. You taught me that quiet dignity is worth more than loud wealth." I sipped my tea, considering my words carefully. "What are you going to do now?" Michael looked up. "I want to make this right. However I can. First," I said, "you need to understand that my showing those documents wasn't about punishing you. It was about waking you up." "I'm awake," Michael said fervently. "I swear, I'm awake." Second, you need to decide what kind of man you want to be. Do you want to be the man your father was? The man who valued substance and character? Or do you want to be the man you've been becoming? The one who judges people by their car and their address? "I want to be Dad," Michael whispered. "I want to be the man you both raised me to be." "Then prove it," I said simply. "Not to me. To yourself. Change how you live. Change how you treat people. Change your priorities." Over the following weeks, I watched him try. He moved out of the penthouse into a modest apartment. He sold the Tesla and bought a practical sedan. He started having lunch in the company cafeteria instead of expensive restaurants. More importantly, he started asking questions. About how I'd managed the estate. About how I'd invested. About the decisions his father and I had made. He started learning the lessons he should have learned years ago. Vanessa changed too. She had a fierce argument with her mother. I heard about it from the wedding coordinator, who'd become an unexpected friend. She started volunteering at a homeless shelter. She got a job at a non-profit instead of joining her father's real estate company. Whether their marriage would survive, I didn't know. But they were both trying to build it on something real instead of something hollow. As for me, I made some changes of my own. I bought a new car. Not ostentatious, but new. I updated my wardrobe. Not dramatically, but enough to feel less invisible. And I started saying yes to things I'd always said no to. Charity galas where I could make connections that mattered. Board positions where I could make a difference. Opportunities to use my resources for good instead of hiding them away. Martin Chen smiled when I told him about my plans. Eleanor, you're finally living like the wealthy woman you've always been. No, I corrected. I'm living like a woman who knows her worth. There's a difference. 6 months after the wedding, Michael and Vanessa invited me to dinner at their apartment. It was small, cozy, filled with IKEA furniture and wedding photos carefully displayed. Michael had cooked something he'd learned from YouTube, he admitted sheepishly. The meal was simple but made with love. After dinner, Michael handed me an envelope. What's this? I asked. A business proposal. I want to restructure Thornton Manufacturing. I want you as an active partner, not a silent majority shareholder. I want to learn from you. Really learn. The way I should have been learning all along. I opened the envelope. Inside was a detailed plan for expanding the company while maintaining ethical practices, investing in employees, building something sustainable rather than just profitable. It looked like something his father would have written. I'm proud of you, I said, and I meant it. Vanessa spoke up. And I have something too. I've been talking to the foundation that manages scholarships at Michael's old university. They want to create a scholarship in your name. The Eleanor Morrison Thornton Scholarship for students who demonstrate strong character despite financial challenges. I felt tears prick my eyes. That's beautiful. We want to fund it together, Michael added. You, me, and Vanessa. A family project. I'd like that, I whispered. That night, driving home in my new but modest car, I thought about the wedding. The 4th row. The humiliation. The documents I'd distributed. Some people might think I'd been cruel. Vindictive. That I'd ruined my son's wedding day. But I'd given him something more valuable than a perfect wedding. I'd given him truth. I'd given him a mirror that showed him who he'd become and a chance to become someone better. I pulled into my driveway. I'd decided to keep the modest townhouse despite Martin's suggestions to upgrade, and sat for a moment, looking at the lights glowing in the windows. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Thank you, Mom. For everything. For raising me right. For not giving up on me. For loving me enough to let me see the truth. I love you. I replied simply, I love you too, son. Always have. Always will. I thought I'd lost everything at that wedding. My dignity. My son. My place in his life. Instead, I'd gained something I'd been missing for 18 months, my son's respect. And in the end, that was worth more than any amount of money, any seat at any table, any appearance of wealth or status. Because real wealth isn't what you have. It's who you are. It's who you raise. It's the values you pass on. James had taught me that. And now, finally, Michael understood it too. I walked into my house, made myself a cup of tea, and settled into my favorite chair with a book. Content. At peace. A woman who'd been underestimated her entire life. Who'd been pushed to the 4th row. Who'd held the biggest secret at that wedding. And who'd used that secret not to destroy, but to teach. That, I thought, was real power.